All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is Daily Vlog 2025, number 251. And today, I needed a drink. Hen is not being nice to me today. So, today, something interesting was posted by Japanese D&D. What do you mean Japanese D&D? That don't sound right. D&D is an American company. So, I've talked about this a lot. D&D is the number one tabletop RPG in the world. However, it doesn't mean it is the number one TTRPG in every single country. And in Japan specifically, it's not. My understanding is it's not even close. It does have a presence there. It is popular there, but it is dwarfed by things like Call of Cthulhu. I believe Sword World is pretty damn big over there. I believe it's still bigger than D&D. And a bunch of other games as well. So, on the D&D website, they just released a trailer. Specifically, it is the Japanese trailer for the Oni's Right Hand, which is a Japanese written and focused, as far as I can tell, starter adventure. And this theoretically could be kind of a big deal, but I don't think it's going to work the way that Wizards of the Coast thinks it's going to work. And I'm going to give a suggestion for what I think they should do. So, I've told this story many times before. I'm going to tell it again. Way back in the before times, in the 80s, a group of authors got together to play some Dungeons and Dragons, and they were approached by a magazine that said, hey, we really would like people to get into Dungeons and Dragons. Would you guys mind basically transcribing your games? We'll publish them in our magazine, and it'll kind of be like a how to play D&D. But as opposed to like breaking it down and going, this is a D4, this is a D6, we're just going to let them read exactly what you guys did. And they went, oh yeah, that's cool. And thus the Record of Lodoss War was born. And it eventually turned into, from this thing that was published in a magazine to a light novel series, to a manga, to an anime series that I recently made it through the whole thing, and it's wonderful. Even now, 40 years later, it holds up remarkably well. Like, I enjoyed every second of it. They made kind of like a sequel-ish series in the late 90s. To it that I'm slowly making my way through, but it was absolutely brilliant. But the thing with Record of Lodoss War is after effectively the first quote-unquote season of the game itself, the players started feeling limited by the Dungeons and Dragons basics rules. And so they decided to just create their own TTRPG, which my understanding is that eventually evolved into Sword World. And because of that, D&D was really, really popular in the 80s. And then Sword World came out, and other TTRPGs started coming out, and Wizard of the Coast, I don't know if you guys know what happened to, or not even Wizard of the Coast, TSR, I don't know if you guys know what happened to TSR in the late 80s and 90s. They screwed the pooch. They over-leveraged the brand. The company came into severe financial distress. And in order to keep the company afloat, they basically started abandoning a lot of different things, including overseas markets. And they weren't super heavily supported before then. And so one of the biggest reasons, and that was one of the reasons why Wizards of the Coast bought them out, was because they saw something that they thought they could make money off of, which they could, and were able to kind of save the D&D brand. If D&D hadn't been bought out by Wizards of the Coast, D&D wouldn't exist. That's how poorly TSR was doing. But while yes, D&D does print books in Japanese, which is a really essential thing. If you want your game to be popular in another country, you do need to take the effort of getting it translated properly into the dominant language in that country. So they do. There is a Japanese kind of office of Wizard of the Coast, a Japanese office of Dungeons and Dragons that handles this stuff there. But for the most part, all that really happened with the Japanese market is they would get, I believe, most, if not all, the stuff that D&D published over here just translated into Japanese. But there was never any real effort made to target the Japanese market, to make things kind of exclusively for Japan, or not even exclusively, just things that were more aimed at a Japanese audience. They kind of have been operating under this mantle of, we know what people want, so we're just going to do, we're just going to create stuff, and then the people that want it will want it. So recently, there's been kind of a bigger push by Wizards of the Coast to start specifically targeting the Japanese market and other markets as well, but the ones that I've seen the most of are Japanese, by doing things like creating specifically Japanese ads for various D&D products, or just for D&D in general. And this is the latest attempt by them to go, you know what, let's try and actually target the Japanese market. And so, as far as I can tell, I don't speak Japanese, I don't read Japanese, I really don't know anything that's going on in this video, because it's all Japanese text and all Japanese dialogue, and it's just not something that I know how to do. But my understanding is this is basically like an intro adventure or starter adventure, something like that, for a specifically targeted at Japanese players. And so it uses Japanese themes. The characters themselves are designed with Japanese folklore and trends and things like that built into them. Like it is very, very Japanese. And this could mark a really interesting change. However, that's not why D&D is not as popular in Japan as Call of Cthulhu. I've talked about this many times before. The reason that Call of Cthulhu is the #1 TTRPG in Japan is because of these things called replays. Now, again, Record of Lodoss War was the first replay. It's basically you transcribe your adventure and then you publish it in some way. They used to be done in magazines and then in light novels. And then YouTube started. And there's a Japanese website that's effectively kind of YouTube, where replays are really, really popular. And specifically, Call of Cthulhu replays became incredibly popular, and that's one of the biggest reasons why Call of Cthulhu is the #1 TTRPG in Japan right now, and has been since like the late 2000s. These replays are a really, really big deal. It's how Japan effectively was introduced to tabletop RPGs, was through the Record of Lodoss War replay. And that was the initial spark that ignited a TTRPG craze in Japan in the 80s and 90s. And it's now seeing a bit of a resurgence. And yes, creating things that are more coded towards Japanese culture and a Japanese audience is very, very good. But if they truly want to become a market presence, and I don't think they're going to overthrow Call of Cthulhu anytime soon, just because, while yes, the replays are a big deal of it, there's also the fact that Call of Cthulhu deals with themes that tend to be just very popular in Japanese entertainment in general. Like kind of the hopelessness and the horror aspect, like those are all things that are very, very popular in Japanese entertainment, and that's just not something that D&D does super well. So I'm not saying that this will overtake Call of Cthulhu, but if they really want to target this particular market, then what they really should do is pay a group of Japanese TTRPG players to play D&D with the express purpose of creating a replay series. Now, in the US and in Europe and a few other places, but definitely in the US, the thing that gets people interested in TTRPGs right now is live plays, and has been for about a decade. Acquisitions Incorporated was one of the first, and it was highly successful at getting people into 4th edition. It's the reason I got into 4th edition, and the reason I got into tabletop RPGs at all is because of Acquisitions Incorporated. It was effective for what it did. However, when we started getting things like Dimension 20, Critical Role, High Rollers, whatever the one used to be that ITME JP used to run that I can never remember what it was called, live plays became the infection vector for Western markets in general. And because of that, Wizards of the Coast jumped on that bandwagon. Not only did they sponsor Critical Role all the time, but they also had their own live play series in Dice Camera Action. And I think they had another one as well for a little while. But they also would do things like the Stream of Many Eyes, which I actually knew a couple people that were on that stream. And other things like that they went heavily into live play, and it worked remarkably well. Again, D&D saw huge increases in numbers. And if Dungeons & Dragons wants to break into the Japanese market, this is a nice start, but I don't believe this is the most effective way to do it. If they really do want to break into the market, they need to get into the replay scene. And specifically, they need to not do it themselves. They need to find someone who already understands the culture and get them to do it for Wizards of the Coast. Because, to be blunt, a lot of Western culture just simply doesn't understand the idea behind the replays, and Japanese culture in general can seem very, very kind of foreign and alien to a lot of, especially if you look at U.S. Western culture, because U.S. culture in and of itself is its own brand of nonsense. Like, one of my favorite things in the world was watching someone who had kind of been trained their entire life about how to be, before it was called woke, it was called PC, political correctness. And they were talking about Europe, specifically the UK. And they were wondering about, well, how many African Americans live in the UK? And they were talking to a British person. They go, well, not that many. It's like, well, I've seen them on like TV and stuff. It's like, yeah, those aren't African Americans. What do you call them? Well, we just call them black people, or if we want to do the political correct things, people of African descent, but they're not African Americans because they're not American. See, in the U.S., the idea of someone of African descent, or really not even someone of African descent, the term African American has been used for a lot of different people that have none of their ancestors are even from Africa. Like a lot of the Caribbean and West Indies population, simply because they have very dark skin, have been considered, oh, well, they're obviously African Americans. People just assume that if you have dark skin, you somehow have ancestry in Africa. And we were told that calling people, black people or anything like that, there are other significantly worse than the names that I'm not going to use here. That's just wrong. You call them African Americans because that's what they are. Except it's not what they are. They are only African Americans if they're actually from Africa and they are American. If they're actually from Africa and they live in the UK, they're not African American. And so, yeah, the US has this strange mindset that everybody thinks like us. And then when they meet someone that doesn't, a lot of people get very, very offended and they just don't understand it. And if you go all the way over to Japan, the culture is very, very different. And I just don't have the confidence that the people working at Wizards of the Coast are going to make the effort to actually learn about Japanese culture. And it's simply easier and significantly more effective for them to go, okay, how about we let Japanese people design Japanese things for the Japanese people? Like, they already know the culture because they grew up in it. They live it every single day. So yeah, I did find a really interesting comment on the video that Dungeons and Dragons put on YouTube. It's a little bit far down, and it may get buried. So I'm gonna like it just because I think it's really cool. So the comment itself, I'm just gonna read it in its entirety because my thought is the person that wrote this, whether or not this is the person that posted is the person that wrote it, or if they're transcribing something from another place. I don't believe English is their primary language because there's a few things in here that just don't make a ton of sense grammatically. So just going to read it in its entirety and then talk about it. So the comment, which is from MS Labo 102, is the thing. I normally don't single people out, but this is really, really great comment. And I want other people to be able to find it in case, they want to. So, this is the comment. A serious plea from Japanese D&D community. We need your recognition and support. Despite how our country love RPGs, D&D was never huge here. You can find multiple videos on YouTube about that. But things are about to change, or was about to change, if I say. WotC itself finally took over Japanese products to match the wave of promotional contents, such as Honor Among Thieves movie. It made it to Twitter trends. Baldur's Gate 3, and soon the otherworldly Munchkin anime, based on a legally distinct D&D inspired manga. But WotC Japan themselves have jumped on to the opportunity. Taking familiar Japanese motifs into their free adventure is one such move. But still, things are looking dire. Ever since late 2000s, Call of Cthulhu have dominated our land, and theater kids run rampant on a heavily railroaded emoshis, short for emotional scenario. Lowly players yap about, quote, no changing the scenario, end quote, on some free adventures because they want to share their experiences on social media. Despite our rising interest in fantasy media in the last few years, there's just one new fantasy TTRPG called Ionia Rose in popularity, not D&D. And yet, D&D here haven't released a new product over 1.5 years. There's 2024 rules with quality of life already, but we're still stuck in the 2014 rules. That's why we need your help and recognition. What I believe to be D&D's strength is the community worldwide and being deep roots to RPG as whole. TTRPGs are hard to cross language barrier, especially between Japanese and English, but D&D can. So get out there and please spread the word out there about this. Oni's Right Hand had a positive reaction from us and managed to shed light to D&D's multiversal nature. Kara-Tur is part of Forgotten Realms, but still. Otherwise thought as pure, rigidly high fantasy from non-fans. That's what language barrier and unfamiliarity does to an old franchise. So this might be our one last chance to get D&D on the spotlight like never before. So as far as I can tell, that's the end of it, by the way. So as far as I can tell, This is a Japanese D&D fan that is upset that D&D is not as popular in Japan as they would like it to be. And they mention a couple different things. First of all, those emoshis or emotional scenarios. This is not something that I instantly recognize, but it sounds familiar to me when I was doing my research for Call of Cthulhu and replays. And then we talk about the quote, no changing the scenario on some free adventures because they want to share their experiences on social media. That's that idea. You know, again, the reason that D&D got as popular as it was in the initial thing, and then the reason that tabletop RPGs are popular now is the kind of shared experience that things like replays and social media have. And yet D&D has never really embraced this because that's not how it works in the West. Again, we have something kind of similar in live plays, but it's not the same. And our live plays are a very, very new thing for the market. Again, replays have been happening since the 80s in Japan. So they were on that boat long before we were even thinking about it. But I really love everything about this post because they identify a lot of really, really important things in there. They mention that translating TTRPGs between languages is very, very difficult, especially between English and Japanese. For anyone who doesn't know, English, if we're looking at actually like origins of languages, English is what's referred to as a Germanic language, meaning it evolved from the various Germanic language that were spoken in Europe, in kind of northwestern Europe. German is another Germanic language. And so the thing with things like translating English to German, it's remarkably simple because the syntax between English and German is almost identical. We put the subjects and verbs and describing words and all those other things, they tend to follow the same pattern and everything. And it's just we use different words. Now, when you look at something like the Romance languages, which are French, Italian, Spanish, and French, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. The reason they are called Romance language, they are all Latin based. And because of that, the syntax is actually different. One of the hardest things a lot of people have to learn when you're learning a Romance language is the fact that when you're describing nouns using things like adjectives, it feels backwards because instead of like in if I wanted to say like a blue house, you know, look at that blue house. In English, that's a blue house. In French, and I think this is a bad example because I can't remember if color comes first or second. Or Maison Bleue. Yeah, I believe color comes second. So anyway, it's been a long time since I spoke French. But the way that it would be said in French would be c'est une maison bleue. That's a house blue. That is a house that is blue. They define the noun before they put the describing word. And that's not true about every single thing, at least in French. There are certain words like, I believe, like grand et petit comes before it. So big and small comes before it. But the majority of adjectives come after the noun. And so a lot of people, when you learn, if you grew up speaking a Germanic language and you learn a Romance language, it feels like you have to speak backwards. And the same thing is true about Romance. If you grew up speaking a Romance language and you start learning a Germanic-based language, it feels backwards. Now, when we go to Japanese, it is completely different syntax-wise. Japanese, you identify the speaker, and sometimes you don't identify this as a speaker. Then you identify the subject, and then every thing else in this sentence. So the sentence structure is completely different. And it means that translating something from English, a Germanic based language, to Japanese is really, really weird because you have to change it into a completely different syntax. And because of how important word choice is, finding a word that actually translates not only the right kind of feeling, but also the actual mechanical benefit you're trying to give to that particular sentence is very, very difficult. So the more different the languages are, the more difficult it's going to be to translate them. And again, just translating a book from English to German, which are both Germanic based languages, is difficult because German does have different words that mean different things and they don't have the exact same words. You can't just go, oh, well, we replace this word with this word and everything works perfectly. And then translating to the Romance languages is even more difficult. And then we're going into a language with a completely different syntax. Yeah, that's very, very difficult. But one of the ways you get around that is by, and this is what D&D used to do, and I think they're doing again now in Brazil, is instead of trying to translate it themselves, what they did is they hired a company, a publisher in Brazil, that would distribute the Portuguese books and would do the translation and everything for it. And that tends to be the best way to do this because the people at this publishing company, they exclusively publish TTRPG books and not just D&D. So they already understand how TTRPGs work, how important language is. They also speak Portuguese, read Portuguese, write Portuguese fluently. Most of them have been speaking it all their lives. And so they understand Portuguese, and because they do business with the US, they also understand English. And so that tends to be the absolute best way to do this. But it presents an issue of control. If you're letting someone else distribute and publish and translate your books, you really don't have control over quality of those books. It is entirely in the distributor. However, a lot of times the distributor's name is not on the book, it is the primary company's name. And so when complaints come in and things like that, it's WotC that's getting hit by it, not this little, not really little, not this publisher there. And so it's this strange kind of balancing act that they have to come up with, working with people that can actually do the work that they need, that they also trust enough to be giving this. And for a little while now, D&D has been very, very hesitant to trust their IP to anyone. And WotC has been very exclusive with no, only we get to make it. And if you're going to make something, we get to control what it is that you're making. So now they've started going a little bit more hands off, and now we have this really cool Japanese free adventure that is a step in the right direction, but they still. I don't believe Wizards of the Coast understands the Japanese TTRPG market well enough to be able to run an effective marketing campaign over there. I just don't. I think it would be significantly better. And again, according to this, it sounds like there is a Japanese, they say, but Wizards of the Coast Japan themselves. So it sounds like there is a Wizards of the Coast Japanese office. So I think it would be in everyone's best interest for Wizards of the Coast to just go, okay, you guys live here. This is your country. This is your culture. How are we going to do this? And if the people that work at, I'm going to assume the people at Wizards of the Coast Japan may not be set up to do something like that, then the response from Wizards of the Coast US should be, okay, then I need you guys to come up with a job listing to get people to work for WotC Japan that can do this. Like, if marketing has been run entirely by the US office, then we need you guys to hire your own marketing team. Specifically, Japanese people that have worked in the Japanese marketing industry. Not US based people that have also made ads for Japan, but specifically Japanese marketing people. Get Japanese players to play the game. Like I said, my idea would be find a way to find a group that's open to playing D&D and doing a replay of it, and sponsor them, do something to make it official that, hey, this is the official Wizards of the Coast replay. But that's all they do, is they slap their name on it and then let these people that already understand the culture and how things work do their jobs. And again, it's a scary thing for companies in general, the idea of taking something like the bad thing that can happen when you do that is if you trust the wrong person, they can literally destroy your company. They do something horrific with the IP. It will always come back to you because you are the IP owner. And going with, we licensed it out to them. We don't, that doesn't work. In the court of public opinion, you're guilty. So it's understandable that they're kind of hesitant to hand over the reins to anyone that doesn't directly work for them. That's the thing with independent contractors in general, is if you use them, you have significantly less control. Legally, you are not allowed to control them that much. And that's what these people would be. But I think that's going to be the only way for D&D to get it up there. The other thing I found really interesting, so if anyone has never heard the term Kara-Tur, Kara-Tur was a here's a post from 3 years ago from r/TND. I'm not even going to click on the post. I'm just going to read the little preview they have on Google. Kara-Tur was a ham-fisted and pretty racist setting that basically read like a 19-year-old whose only knowledge of Asian art was a handful of kung fu movies, and it goes on and on and on. Kara-Tur was basically the East Asian version of D&D, and it's an area in the Forgotten Realms, but it was heavily inspired by Asian culture. In the West, we consider Kara-Tur as, again, racist objectification of an entire culture. However, here, this particular person specifically calls out Kara-Tur as something positive. They specifically say Kara-Tur is part of Forgotten Realms, but still, as in, hey, we get that there is some stuff there, but it's not enough. And I find that really, really fascinating that, again, my understanding of Kara-Tur is this is incredibly racist. I've never played any of the Kara-Tur adventures or anything. That was before my time. But that's what, that's what most people think of when they hear Kara-Tur in the West is, oh, that was racist. But of course, the same thing can be said about 4E. Oh, 4E was an MMO. It wasn't. That's a bold-faced lie. It was never an MMO. It was never attempted to be an MMO. It was designed, like people are like, oh, it's just World of Warcraft. It was designed before World of Warcraft was World of Warcraft. That's how it works. World of Warcraft came out in 2006. 4E came out in 2008 and already was in production long before World of Warcraft was popular. It was kind of popular when it launched, but it wasn't the 10 million players until like 2012, 2013, something like that. So no, World of Warcraft was not what inspired 4th edition. Wizards of the Coast didn't know World of Warcraft existed when they were designing 4th edition because it didn't. But a lot of people think that, and apparently the idea that Kara-Tur is just this incredibly racist thing may just be malcontents that like to bitch and moan about shit. Because apparently in Japan, it's not nearly as negatively viewed. So yeah, anyway, like I just said, I like the idea that Wizards of the Coast is willing to target probably, I think Japan might be the second or third largest market for TTRPGs in general. They're Japan in and of itself, as far as world markets are concerned, is in the top 10. But when you compare it to the things like India, China, and the U.S., it doesn't compete in any way, shape, or form, because especially China and the U.S. are just two massive economies. Something like more than half of money in the world goes through either China or the U.S. Like it's big. Like they're just massive, huge. So it's not like, Japan is going to become the number one country for TTRPGs. It's never going to happen. They don't have a population large enough to do that. And it's a remarkably small country as well. That being said, I'm happy to see them finally starting to target a different market in a more effective way, because simply going, hey, we got this real cool thing, y'all should probably play it, is not going to work in every single market. Yes, D&D is very popular, and publishing the same books everywhere else as they do in the US does work for a lot of different things, but it's not the best way to do it. And having things that are specifically designed for certain cultures and certain markets will work better. Like, it just will. So, interested to hear from you guys. First of all, what are your guys' thoughts on the idea of this new, as far as we can tell, Japanese only free adventure? And what do you think about, do you think this is a step in the right direction for D&D to finally gain some market share in Japan? Or do you think this is too little too late? It's just a marketing ploy? What do you guys think? Love to hear in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it's all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.